Hello. So let's go back to your discussion. Wait 1 minute. So we will be discussing yung bacterial toxins. So the different organisms have different types of damage to different host cells, and one of the mechanism of damage are yung presence of toxins. So familiar sa Shigella, Salmonella, and E. coli types of bacterial toxin. Kahit mga gram-positive, meron din silang mga important bacterial toxins that cause damage to the host cell. So how do your bacterial cells damage host cells? So meron tayong three mechanisms: direct damage, toxins, hypersensitivity reaction. So most bacterial damage is carried out by toxins kasi maliliit lang naman yung mga organisms or yung mga bacteria, pathogenic bacteria, so less likely lang na ang pathogenicity nila is directly related to direct damage. But most of their bacterial damage is carried out by toxins. Pero let's try to differentiate first the three. So yung direct damage, sometimes there are organisms like E. coli, Shigella, Salmonella, and Neisseria can induce cells to engulf them. And there are microbial metabolism and process of bacterial multiplication that can kill host cells. So they will release enzymes and kill the host cell or through their own motility. So ganun yung direct damage, parang physical attack. Next is yung toxins. So toxins are poisonous substances being produced by microbes. So most of the time, toxins are the main pathogenic factor of bacteria. And the toxigenicity in terms of definition is the ability of an organism or a microbe to produce toxin and yung degree. Toxemia naman is the presence of toxins in the blood. And the effects of those toxins can be fever, can be cardiovascular problems, diarrhea, shock, or hemolysis, or CNS manifestations. And of the discovered 220 bacterial toxins, 40% of them damage eukaryotic cell membranes. So ang target nila mostly are eukaryotic cell membranes. So there are two types of toxins, yung exotoxin and endotoxin. So in terms of action, ang exotoxin is are being produced inside mostly gram-positive bacteria. And that is considered as a part of their um, growth and metabolism. So, i-release nila yon into the surrounding medium or environment. And yung endotoxin naman, those are toxins that are part of the outer portion of the cell wall. For example, lipid A of gram-negative bacteria. So they will be released or liberated if the bacteria will die and the cell wall will break apart. So, pero um, one mostly sa gram-negative ito na nakikita. Gram-negative cell wall na nakikita, ang mga endotoxin. Pero one notable gram-positive organism that has endotoxin is your Listeria monocytogenes. Okay, your exotoxins, those are enzymes that will carry out specific reaction. So, produced sila mainly by gram-positive bacteria, and yung genes for toxins are carried on plasmids or phages, or yung mga bacterial viruses. So, merong membrane-acting toxins and meron ding toxins with cytosolic targets. So, your toxins are responsible for killing or damage of host cells. So, yun yung cytotoxin. Pagka interference with nerve impulses, neurotoxin. If it affects the lining of the gastrointestinal tract, so yun yung enterotoxin. So, your antibodies called antitoxins can provide immunity. And those toxoids naman are the toxins that are altered by heat or chemicals, and ginagamit natin yun for vaccines, for example, for diphtheria and tetanus. So, nakarinig na kayo ng tetanus toxoid. So, common siya binibigay. And it is formulated formulated through changing the toxic capability of the toxins. So, in terms of mode of action, yung ating exotoxin can damage membranes by formation of pores. Pwede rin siyang mag-inhibit ng protein synthesis. Pwede rin siyang mag-activate ng second messenger pathways. Pwede rin siyang maging super antigen, activating immune response. And pwede rin siyang mag-destroy ng mga cellular barriers by creating breakage as an enzyme. For example, mga zinc metalloprotease. So again, your exotoxins are typically soluble proteins secreted by living bacteria and mostly gram-positive organisms. So let's go to specific na mga hello. Ay, okay. Na-disconnect ata ang aking mic. Saan tayo nag-stop? Dito? Or sa E. coli lang?
Sa E.
Sa E.
coli
coli
po.
po.
Okay. Sige. Again, we will be discussing a portion of E. coli that produces certain toxins. So example niyan is yung ating category of E. coli, we call the enterotoxigenic Escherichia coli. So it causes watery diarrhea and abdominal cramps. So paano ba siya nakaka-enter sa small intestine? So it will colonize the small intestine as mediated by the fimbriae. So merong toxins na nare-release in the small intestine, and those toxins are what we call the heat labile toxin and the heat stable toxin. So yung heat labile toxin, para yun siyang cholera toxin, meron siyang A and B portion. Yung heat stable toxin naman, it is important it is significant in the accumulation of cyclic guanosine monophosphate, which causes hypersecretion. And that will cause a loss of electrolyte and water. So, yung ETEC infection, yung ETEC organism natin will adhere to the intestinal epithelial cell. And the adhesins, which are also known as a colonization factor antigen, so itong nasa taas, CFA. So those adhesins will cause them to adhere to the small intestinal cell but not producing damage. Pero pag nag-release na ng toxin, yung heat labile or heat stable toxin or both, yung LT will attach to an active A subunit, and the labile toxin will bind to the glycolipid receptor and will now be able to enter the enterocyte or yung small intestinal cell. So yung ating labile toxin will be transported in a retrograde manner in membrane-bound vesicles to the Golgi apparatus. And ngayon, di ba meron siyang A and B subunit? Yung A subunit will now reach its target in the baso or basolateral cell membrane, meaning yung sa part ng epithelium na naka-attach sa interstitium. So when that happens, it will catalyze the release of ADP ribose of the target. And that will now cause the release of your adenylate cyclase. So yan yung ating heat labile toxin. And di ba may nare-release na parang adenylyl cyclase. So, nagkakaroon ng second messenger activation. So, nagkakaroon ng increased levels of CAMP. Yung yellow illustration dyan. And then, there will be activation of another enzyme, yung protein kinase A. And it will phosphorylate the CFTR receptor or the cystic fibrosis transmembrane conductance regulator receptor. So, yan ang nagme-mediate ng release of electrolytes or hypersecretion of water and electrolytes outside of the enterocyte. So, yan ang action ng ating heat-stable toxin. Ay, sorry. Oo. Yung kanina yung labile toxin pala. Ngayon, yung heat-stable toxin naman will activate a certain pathway. And yung stable toxin will act as a hormone resembling guanylin. So when that happens, dito, yung heat-stable toxin binding with the guanylyl cyclase and creating second messenger na interaction. So, isusupport na yung action kanina na heat labile toxin. And your heat stable toxin will cause elevation in the levels of the CGMP. And together, they will create electrolyte and fluid efflux through the same pump or receptor na si CFTR. So si heat labile toxin more on camp adenylyl cyclase ganon. Pero si heat stable toxin more on CGMP, both creating an increased efflux of water and electrolytes in the enterocytes. So that is the effect of your enterotoxigenic na E. coli. So, ang ETEC, minsan nagpe-present lang ng mild self-limiting disease characterized by watery diarrhea, abdominal cramps, and walang fever or vomiting. And di ba, yung mucosal penetration ng ETEC does not necessarily destroy the cells or the enterocyte, but yung toxins niya na pumapasok doon sa enterocyte, yun yung nagre-release ng mga fluid and electrolytes sa enterocytes, creating the watery diarrhea. On the other hand, si enterohemorrhagic E. coli. So this is the causative agent of your, ang pathophysiology niya is more like yung hemolytic uremic syndrome. So merong two cytotoxins. Yung verotoxin 1, which is a Fag-encoded toxin, and this is similar to Shigella toxin. And yung verotoxin 2, which is also known as Shiga-like toxins. So yung Shiga toxins are heat labile toxins na similar sa your Shiga toxins are toxins, parang homolog toxin of your EHEC, and similar siya in terms of structure doon sa heat labile toxin of your enterotoxigenic E. coli. So, ang kanyang structure is a pentamer receptor binding B subunits, and they are non-covalently bound to a single enzymatic A subunit. So, si EHEC or si enterohemorrhagic E. coli, yung strain known as 0157H7. So, di ba they produce verotoxin 1 and verotoxin 2. So, they will produce damage to the enterocytes, and they will also neutralize antibodies against Shiga-like toxin. So, yung endothelial cells natin are important target cells of Shiga toxins. And yung toxins, these toxins are also transported in a retrograde manner in bound vesicles padulong sa endoplasmic reticulum. So, di ba may A subunit siya? And it will induce depuration in ribosomal RNA. This will lead to stopping or cessation of protein synthesis, creating cell death. So that is the action of the those toxins. And your Shiga toxin will also bind to proteins on the surface of glomerular endothelium, and they will inactivate certain metalloproteinases called yung von Willebrand factor cleaving protease, or the VWFCP. So once CVWFCP is disabled, so yung multimers of von Willebrand factor will form and will initiate platelet activation, causing microthrombi formation. hindi ba si von Willebrand factor exist as a multimer? Tapos, merong mga metalloproteinases that will cleave each multimer so that they will be not parang hindi sila magkukumpol-kumpol. And if there will be disabling of these metalloproteinases, they will initiate platelet activation and will cause the thrombi formation. So, ano nangyayari? Yung mga arterioles and capillaries of the body will be obstructed because of the thrombus. And there will be complexes of activated platelets na nag-adhere na doon sa endothelium through large multimeric von Willebrand factor. And yung thrombi will lodge in smaller blood vessels and destroy RBCs when they try to squeeze in the narrowed blood vessels. So they will create fragmentation of RBC. So para tayo nagkakaroon ng small blood vessel hemolysis or the microangiopathic hemolysis. So that's what happens from the inactivation of the E. coli toxin of the von Willebrand factor protease present in the glomerular endothelium. So nagkakaroon ng consumption of platelets, nagkakaroon ng severe thrombocytopenia, and nagkakaroon ng kidney failure because of reduced blood flow. So that's how your enterohemorrhagic E. coli creates hemolytic uremic syndrome. Kaya it's important to check if ito bang ito bang E. coli is a producer of these virotoxins. So these are important na mga exotoxins. Yung diphtheria toxin, erythrogenic toxin, botulinum toxins, tetanus toxins, and vibrio toxin, enterotoxin, and staphylococcal enterotoxin. So diphtheria toxin released by Corynebacterium diphtheriae, and there exists also two polypeptides, active and binding. Erythrogenic toxins, yung strep pyogenes, that's why there is a production of red rash on those patients na na-infect with strep pyo and manifested as erysipelas. Yung botulinum toxin is produced by your Clostridium botulinum, and ang action niya is inhibition of the acetylcholine, thus causing prevention of the nerve impulses to muscle, causing flaccid paralysis. So that is an extremely potent toxin, but somehow we have able to utilize it as an aesthetic form of medication to prevent parang wrinkling of skin. Tetanus toxin is produced by Clostridium tetani. So this also produces paralysis, pero it will create relaxation of skeletal muscles and will cause uncontrollable muscle spasm. So spastic paralysis, and will also cause convulsion if severe. Ang Vibrio enterotoxin produced by Vibrio cholerae also exists as two polypeptides, A and B. So yung A subunit of the enterotoxin will cause discharging large amount of fluids and electrolytes. So similar siya sa one toxin produced by the ETEC. And the staphylococcal enterotoxin is an enterotoxin similar to cholera toxin but causes toxic shock syndrome, generalized and immediate hypotension caused by Staph aureus septicemia. Okay. So endotoxin naman are part of outer membrane surrounding the gram-negative bacteria. So ang other term sa mga endotoxins, sometimes sinatawag sila as pyrogens kasi They can cause a wide variety of generalized reaction like fever, shock, or yung changes in blood pressure and other circulatory functions. So your endotoxin is a lipid portion of um, your lipid portion of the lipopolysaccharide called lipid A is an endotoxin. And when gram-negative cells die and the cell walls undergo lysis, it will liberate endotoxin and it will produce generalized symptoms. So yung endotoxin facilitates a pyrogenic response, meaning nagkakreate siya ng fever, kaya minsan tinatawag sila na pyrogens. So yung endotoxins will not promote the formation of effective antibodies unlike yung ating exotoxins. So yung endotoxins will, if released in fair amounts, can cause death in most organisms. So ano mga nagpo-produce ng endotoxin? Salmonella typhi, Proteus, Pseudomonas, Neisseria, and sometimes even when we sterilize medical equipment, pwede pa rin pala silang mag-contain ng endotoxin. So, the Limulus amoebocyte assay is being utilized as a test to detect tiny amounts of endotoxin. So, ano yung sequence of events when there is an exposure to endotoxin? So, merong latent period or, yung parang incubation period if sa infection, so may latent period, and then there will be physiologic distress and then death. So the degree of the organism death depends on the dosage of endotoxin, the route of administration, and the species of the organism. So yun ang mga endotoxins. So present siya sa lipid A in the lipopolysaccharide as an example. And we use other methods in detecting endotoxins. For example, Limulus amoebocyte lysate test, pwede rin na rabbit pyrogen test, pwede rin na neutrophil chemiluminescence test. So that is how we try to detect your endotoxins. So that is our discussion for today on